Originally designed as a replacement for 7.62 by 39, 5.45 by 39 is a much more easy to control round in Tarkov. The AKs are super cheap and they also are really effective at punching through armor. So today we're going to be going through the best builds for the 5.45 guns and comparing them against each other with some of the stock guns versus the meta guns, so you guys can find some of the best builds for you from budget to best. So at level 2 Pratport, you can actually buy an AK-74N, which is about 35,000 rubles, a little bit cheaper on the flea sometimes. And you also have the AK-74 here for about 34,000 rubles. If we look at the two side by side, you might not notice many differences between the two, but the really interesting fact is that the AK-74N is actually statistically better. We have one ergo higher, and we also have a 1 recoil difference in horizontal. But not just that, we also do have the dovetail mount on the side. Now, the only real major trade-off that you do for this is a slightly more in weight over the AK-74. And also, sometimes the price reflects that. You can actually see the AK-74N is about 35k, whereas sometimes the 74 itself is considerably cheaper. And if you think about that in the grand scheme of things, if you can get yourself a high durability one, sometimes cheaper, if that might be a better deal for you, because that slight difference in stats is not worth the money in my opinion. At level 3 Pratport, you can buy the AK-74M for about 39,000 rubles. What's really interesting about the 74M is that you can find them also on the flea market for considerably lower prices, but it also depends on the durability. You're not always going to get one for cheap. The cool thing about the AK-74M is just like the AK-103 compared to the AKM, is that the 74M is a more modern variant with much higher ergo. What you'll notice is 50 ergo on this one compared to the 44 of the basic 74N. But we are going to trade out a tiny bit of recoil here at 229 horizontal compared to the 226 of the AK-74N. That I just did want to point out, however, the AK-74M does come with the dovetail mount and is a lot of the time much cheaper and also has a lot of polymer parts. So that makes the AK-74M probably one of the better budget options. Next up, we have the RPK-16, considered one of the kings of 5.45. You can purchase this from max level Pratport. The biggest problem is it is quite exy at 68,000 rubles just for the gun. Interesting enough, however, you can buy them off the flea market for considerably cheaper, around 40,000 to 45,000 rubles depending on the time of day. The RPK-16, however, the reason that it is so strong is that it comes with really strong stats straight off the bat. If we have a look at the RPK compared to the 74M or any sort of other AK, what we'll immediately notice is that the RPK still has better ergo than something like the 74M, which is considered one of the higher ergo AKs, but also it also comes with significantly lower recoil, and that's for both stats here. So let's quickly start out with a budget build here for the AK-74M. This is a really good rifle to start on because it comes with a dovetail mount and a wide variety of good parts to start with. For compensators, you have plenty of different choices, but one of the best choices will be the PWS CQB 74. If you can get your hands on this compensator, it's really good at reducing that recoil. When it comes up to different handguards, one of the best ones that I would consider using is going to be the Strike Industries Trax 1 handguard. You can buy this thing really cheap, and the best thing about this handguard is that you can immediately put on a grip. This SIG grip here, the vertical foregrip key mod black, automatically goes on and reduces your recoil quite considerably. The best thing about this gun is that you can also go ahead and slap on a butt pad at the very back, and you also drop down that recoil a little bit further. Now, once we're here, we have a choice of scopes. If you do want to save some money, you can use something like the Cobra EKP with the shade on the side, and this will give you a scope with also, a really nice sight picture and also a little tiny boost in ergo. However, if you want to cut that recoil down a little bit more, we are going to be taking off the iron sight and changing up the dust cover to the Bastion. I still believe the Bastion is a really cheap and effective dust cover that also, for some weird reason, reduces your recoil. When you use the Bastion as well, you have a wide variety of different scopes that you can use. We're going to be using the Cobra EKP as it's really cheap. And here we happen to have a full gun build for our 5.45 gun, coming in at 57 ergo, 58 vertical recoil, and 165 horizontal. Now, this entire build isn't going to cost you too much, but depending on your level traders, it may. We can notice that I managed to get the entire thing for about 54,000 rubles, which puts us at about 85 to 90,000 rubles for this entire build. I would say the only problem with this build is that you do need to be high level skier, level 3 skier to use this compensator. So if that is the case, you can use this SRVV here, which is a pretty solid one, which is generally a little bit cheaper. And if you can't get that one, then you can use the Zenit DTK1. If you have level 3 mechanic, you can also use the AK Hexagon Reactor, which is the second best compensator after the JMac. And it's generally cheaper on the flea market as well, coming in at 17% recoil. This is pretty good. This is also the compensator that goes in pair with the AK Waffle Maker. But you really do want to be spending a fair bit of extra money. If you are max level traders, you can also use this budget build with a JMac on the end of it, and you'll notice that that recoil is very, very easy to control, and this entire build will cost you next to nothing. If we have a quick look at the two side by side between the 74M and also the 74N for both of our budget builds, and what we'll notice is the AK-74 here on the left is actually better in ergo and only slightly better in horizontal recoil. However, the AK-74M here on the right is actually better in terms of price. So it is the better budget option, as well as the fact that we could even go cheaper because of that side-mounted dovetail. We could also skim a little bit more money if we wanted to save on the dust cover, but I would consider buying the dust cover anyway. All right, so now we're going to have a quick look at a mid-tier build for the AK-74M. We're going to be changing up here to the JMac compensator, guys. It's just too good not to use. For the handguard, you do have plenty of different options. One of the options you can do is change up the gas block to the AK Kiba Arms gas tube, and then you can go ahead and use the UFM Krebs. Now, the biggest problem with this handguard is that you do have to buy the gas tube yourself from mechanic level 3. You cannot buy the gas tube, but you can buy the handguard from Peacekeeper level 3, and it's not going to cost you too much either. Now, you can also buy them on the flea for around 12 to 13,000, which is really, really cheap. So this handguard is quite good. And you can also mount this Sig Sauer grip directly underneath it. So we're going to be going with that because it's also nice and cheap. You change it up to the Scorpius if you wanted to, but one of my personal favorites is the AK Tapco Saw, which gives you a considerable hit of ergo. And that's it, guys. This entire build here is already hitting the low 50s on vertical recoil. This build is also really cheap if you can buy everything from the traders. It's going to cost you about 67,000 rubles for this entire thing. It's got really, really good stats, and across the board will actually be a really effective gun for the price. So now for mid-tier builds, we're looking at the RPK-16. I consider this to be a mid-tier, not a budget gun. But really, you don't really need to do anything to this gun to make it great, and that's why it's a really, really good gun anyway. We're going to be starting out with a mid-tier build here because I think this gun needs a little bit of love to be really good. We're going to be sticking with the PWS CQB 545 compensator. It's just too good to go past. When it comes down to the handguard, you can't change it, unfortunately, just right now in this current stage of the game. But if we are looking at different grips, a really, really good option would be the AFG grips. You can also save a little bit of money by using the off-colored ones like the green and also the tan. But because I'm a bit of a sucker for aesthetics, we're going to be going with the black one, as I believe the ergo is really nice and it does look really, really sexy. Now, when it comes to scopes, you guys can use whatever single one that you want or one that you appreciate the most. I would consider using something high up like an EOTech, as the muzzle flash is pretty monstrous on the RPK, unfortunately. When it comes down to the rest of the gun, you don't really need to do anything. That's the beauty of it. You don't really need to change the pistol grip because the one that it comes with has some pretty solid ergo. The only thing that I would consider doing is change the stock. Now, if you can buy the Mo stocks yourself, they're really good value. Especially some of the off-colored ones are much cheaper on the flea market, as well as the fact that you can put the butt pad on the back of it and get really, really good stats. It's that simple. And you can also tie it in with like a weird colored grip to save yourself some money. So you got green on green. And if you can handle that, you can save a lot of money by doing that. So with that out of the way, let's lead into the next part of the video and where this gun really shines. The RPK was made to be built right. If you want to spend a lot of money on this gun, this is one of the best guns that you could possibly spend money on, as that recoil and also the entire gun sounds and feels awesome to kill people with. The really cool thing about the RPK is that this gun and this build in general doesn't need to change much. You just need to extend the barrel. That's pretty much it. We're going to be changing up the barrel from the 16 to the 22 inch. And we are going to be keeping the same compensator, the PWS on the end of that bad boy right there. Now, when it comes down to grips, we are going to be stepping it up a little bit further as this is the meta build. We'll be changing up to the Stark SE5 Express. For pistol grips, we're going to be changing up to the AK Zenit RK3. And when it comes over to stock, we are going to be sticking with the Magpul Mo. Like I was saying a little bit earlier, you can save a lot of money by using the OD or the different colored stocks. I know it doesn't look the greatest, but this gun here, just like this, and we'll also be changing up the AK charging handle to the CSS knurled charging handle for a little bit of extra ergo. Now, this entire build is already coming down really nicely on that recoil. And the best part is it's also quite cheap in comparison to the Meta 74. Now, this whole build is going to cost you about 105,000 in mods. So that's about 145,000 or 150,000 for the entire build, including the mods and the gun. So that is pretty good. And also the stats on this are really, really good. All right, so now we're looking at the Meta AK-74M. So let's get into it. First things first, we are going to be changing up to a suppressor here. Unfortunately, the AK Reactor is going to be the one of choice here, and we are going to be throwing on the Waffle Maker 5.45x39 suppressor. Now, this combination here is insanely good, but also very, very expensive. When it comes up to the handguard, we are going to be changing the gas block combo into the Troy FLR. As soon as we're done here, we're going to be adding on the Troy 4.2-inch guide, and then we're going to be throwing on the Stark SE5 Express. Taking off the iron sight, we'll be changing up the dust cover to the Bastion. As soon as we're done with the Bastion, we're going to go ahead and throw on whatever scope that we want. For the sake of an example, I'm going to be using the EOTech XPS0 as that's something that I would personally use. On top of this, we are going to be changing up to the AK Custom Arms pistol grip. And we are going to be changing the stock over to the PT lock into the Zenit PT3 Classica stock. And the last thing is to change the charging handle to the CSS AK Knurled charging handle. So this entire build is going to cost you about 233,000 in parts, and that is not including the gun. So we're looking at about 260,000 rubles, including the gun. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but there is a reason that people spend this sort of money on this gun. It is ludicrously low recoil. We are looking at 42 vertical compared to 120 horizontal. That is an absolute freaking laser beam. All right, so the AK-74N build is literally identical, all the same parts. So the Waffle Maker, the Reactor Compensator, the Troy Gas combo block here, as well as the SE5 into the Bastion, into whatever scope. With the CSS charging handle, we've also got the Custom Arms pistol grip. But the only major difference is the stock. And for this one, we're going to be using the Zukov S as it's the best value and also the current best stock that you can get. Now, I did want to point out that you can lower the recoil a tiny, tiny bit by changing up to one of these adapters and then using a lot more expensive parts, but it's simply not worth it because you lose a lot of ergo, and this stock here is really truly the king for the price. So these are the three current meta guns for 5.45 in the game. We have the AK-74N, AK-74M, and then we have the RPK-16. These are built pretty much identically with all the same parts. I tried to keep it as similar as possible. Now, what we'll notice immediately is that the AK-74N has the best stats out of all of them. It has the best ergonomics and also the best recoil. And the crazy part considering this is that although it's suppressed, it still has 64 freaking ergonomics, which is nuts, as well as the fact that it is also better than the 74M, which is usually the higher ergo variant. So this is not really worth building this one right here. I would not spend this much money on an AK-74M, so that really sort of rules that out. The interesting part, however, is on the far right, we are looking at the RPK, which actually is loud, but the interesting and pretty cool thing about the RPK is that it has the highest ergo. It's around 71, considering it's not suppressed, and the cool thing as well is that the recoil is not that much far behind. We're looking at 40 compared to 113, and also 137. So the only major difference is that this RPK definitely has a lot more horizontal recoil. But with all that being said, the RPK is considerably cheaper at around 120,000 rubles cheaper to build than this bad boy here. And most of the price actually comes from this Waffle Maker suppressor, which is also sort of the reason why the stats on this gun are so good. Hey guys, that's it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed these builds. Remember, I do attach every single screenshot of every build we talked about here today in the description down below. If you guys are confused about any of them, feel free to peep those. If you guys have any questions about the builds or just want to chat to me in general, the link to the Discord will be featured down below where you can ask me anything anytime. If you want to come watch me run some of these guns live, the link for my Twitch will also be featured in the description down below. Come hang out anytime, guys. I don't bite, I promise. Thank you so much for watching to the very end, and as always, We'll see you on the next one.